Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get started by setting up a simple C# Godot project. So obviously you're going to need the Godot game engine for that. If you haven't already, you should download the latest and make sure it's the mono version. So the latest version with .NET is going to give you C# support. If you don't have the .NET version, it's not going to allow you to compile and run C# scripts. You will only have GDScript support inside the editor. So that's important. Make sure you get that, install it for your operating system. We also are going to need Visual Studio Code, which you can get at code.visualstudio.com. Really, this is actually optional if you have a preference for your integrated development environment. Visual Studio Code is just really common, especially for beginners. Other options exist out there like Writer IDE. But the TLDR is that you can't effectively edit C# scripts from within the Godot editor. It doesn't really have the syntax support for that. So it's an extra level of complexity, and you can always just start with GDScript if you don't want to commit to C#. But I highly recommend you have Visual Studio Code or a similar IDE if you're going to keep going with C#. Okay, another very important thing you're going to need if you don't have it installed on your system already is the .NET SDK. So this allows you to basically work with C# on your system. If you don't have .NET SDK, there would be no way to compile your code. So the current version is .NET 10. Godot currently in the current stable release, I believe only supports .NET 8. However, I am using this version .NET 10 and I have no issues compiling my code. So you can start with the latest version. If you run into issues for some reason, you can always downgrade to the .NET 8 long-term support version if you need to. But I haven't seen that need, so I'm just running on .NET 10 on my system, and that works fine for me. However, you can see that it's important that when you're setting up your CS project files, and you don't need to worry about this too much right now, but you can see that it's targeting .NET 8.0. So even though I'm running .NET 10 to compile my code, it's actually targeting .NET 8 for compiling the Godot project itself. So that's a bit of a distinction there. Okay, so make sure those are both installed and open up the Godot editor. You'll see the project manager window and you'll want to hit create and then select a folder to host your game project. So I'm going to browse and I'm going to go right into where I predefined this CS for C# setup folder for this tutorial. So inside of here, you're going to want to select the current folder. Now you'll see that it tries to put a new folder inside of that folder. That's optional. You could remove it and then just host in that original folder that you had. Or what we could do is put a /Godot folder inside of here, which is my personal preference. What this allows me to do is have all of the Godot related files right in the Godot folder, and then the parent folder can hold related but non-Godot files separately from the main Godot folder. So this is totally a personal preference thing, but you might want to keep your documentation and stuff that you write for yourself outside of the Godot folder, so it's not cluttering up inside of the Godot editor when you have it open, as one benefit. But yeah, how you set up your folders is ultimately up to you. So I'm going to call this project beginning CS. So it's not required to do this, but I just want to make sure that there's no spaces when the solution file is generating or related tasks we might have to do. I just always want to commit to this Pascal casing style for the C# project. The other stuff down here we can skip over. If you don't know version control or Git, I recommend you learn that at some point, but we'll skip over that for now. Okay, so here's the Godot editor. If you haven't seen it already, it has a 2D view, a 3D view, so 2D and 3D both exist in the game engine. You can script files in this editor, but it's really only useful for GDScript, and I'll show you why in a second. If we go to the file system in the bottom left, and we right-click and create a new folder, let's call it src for source. And then I'll right click in here, do new script, change the language to C#. You'll notice that this changes from snake case, which is lowercase with underscores, to Pascal case, which capitalizes the first letter of each script. That's just standard C# naming. So we're going to want first node here in Pascal case. Inherits from node, and we'll create that there. Okay, so this is in our source folder. If we double click on it, you'll see that in the script editor, there is no syntax coloring or anything. It's also not going to give you error reports. So if you type out some C# complete nonsense like var, 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 which would definitely throw an error, you're going to be getting no feedback here. So ultimately editing C# in the Godot engine itself is just not going to fly. So what you do want to do is go up to Project, Tools, C#, Create Solution. Okay, now this creates the solution file and the .cs project file for your game, and you're not really going to see it here. What it does add, though, is this compile button. So at the bottom, there's an MS Build tab. When you compile your game, you'll get errors or warnings here, depending on if your C# code is valid or not. And you have to compile when you update your code if you want those updates to actually play out in game, if you change the logic or that kind of thing. So let's hit the compile button. It showed error. Okay, you can see I have some obvious syntax errors here, and it's not going to let me compile the node. So that's good, but we would have caught this a lot easier. So that's good, but we would have caught this a lot quicker if we were editing in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so if you're in the Godot editor and you double click on a C# file, it's going to open inside of the editor itself. So that's useful in that you can read the files straight from within the editor. But I think for most people, if you're serious about editing in Visual Studio Code or another IDE that is external, then you're going to want to set an external path to the editor you're using so that when you double click on your scripts, they'll actually open straight inside of that editor and you can edit it directly there. So if you want to set that up, you would go to Editor and then Editor Settings, type in External to filter, and then under Text Editor External, you want to put in your execution path and check and use external editor. So if instead of opening in the editor, you want it to open in your external IDE, then you're probably going to want to go into editor settings, and you're going to want to define an external editor. So if you type external up here, then you can get to these settings where you can define the path to the editor executable that you want to use. So I'm using Visual Studio Code on Linux, so code is the binary name. On Windows, it would be like a .exe file, I think. So you just want the full path to that on your machine. And then execution flags, reuse window means that you double click on the file in the editor and it uses the same instance of your IDE that's already there, so that's very helpful. And then if the symbol you click on has a line or column reference, then it will jump straight there if you do go to file, line, column. And then of course, checking external editor on or off will enable or disable the functionality. Okay, so now I have the editor open like this. If I double click on first node, then you can see it jumps to that file in the editor, which is helpful. If it's not already open, it would open it up. Another alternative you can use would be in editor settings. Instead of reuse window, we would wrap it in the squiggly brackets and do project, and then in the squiggly brackets. So what that'll do is it'll open the file in an instance of the editor that has your Godot project already open. That might be preferable. It depends on if you want the Godot files to all open up directly. But you can see this doesn't include the parent directory like I talked about, but this is probably good for a lot of people. Because you have all of the Godot stuff in the Explorer over here, so you can access all of your source, and it has the file open that you wanted to. So this may be preferable if you always want to work from inside of the Godot project folder itself. But I think for me, I'm going to go back to using reuse window for now. And then you can always open up your workspaces or projects using the file menu. It's not really a big deal. Okay, so if you've already installed Visual Code, what you should do is open up the project, and then you're going to want to open where you installed your Godot project to. So you have these files here, you have the SRC here, and you'd want to open up your node here. So you can see it's warning me here about all these syntax problems. To make sure you're actually getting the correct feedback from the editor, there are some extensions you're going to want for Godot editing. So first off, for editing C#, C# language, C# dev kit, and then Godot-tools. Also very useful, especially if you're doing GDScript. Very hard to edit GDScript without this plugin if you are editing in Visual Studio Code. Of course, not required because you can just edit GDScript inside of the editor itself, and it does work pretty good there for that. Everything else I have here is pretty optional, so we'll just stick with that for now. C# dev kit, which probably includes C# directly for there as well. And then Godot tools, you can just install those up here at the top by searching like C# dev kit. More than likely, as soon as you open up a C# file, it's going to tell you that you should install this anyway. So it should be really accessible. Okay, so we have our first node here. Okay, before we talk about the script, I'm also going to make sure I have some views open. The problems panel at the bottom will give you really good feedback about all of the errors, their exact lines, and you can click on them to jump to them. That's really useful. So let's make this variable valid. So first off, because it's C#, the typing system is a lot more strict by design. So instead of typing just a generic var, so instead we'll say something like int for integer health, and we'll default that to 100. So this could be the number of hit points your character has. Okay, so this script will compile. If we open up the Godot editor, I can hit the build button. It's going to compile. There's no errors down here. It's valid C#, but it's not going to be useful to us because we don't have any attribute tags for, like, let's say, taking the first node and making it GlobalClass. So it's actually going to populate in the scene view over here. You can just drag a node script onto an existing node. So if we just create a new 2D scene here, and I'll just rename this to world, we'll hit Control S and save it into, let's say, a scenes folder. So world.tscn, that's the save format for your packed scenes. We'll go here, I save that, and I could, let's say, right click here and add a generic node, and I can drag the C# script onto that. And that would be valid, technically. I could compile the script, and it's, once again, not going to be very useful to us. So first off, we want our node scripts to actually exist in the drop-down menu when we're adding nodes. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to access. And then secondly, if you're going to have a property that you want to edit, you may want to make it an export var. There are cases where you do want it to be, editable inside of the editor, and there might be cases where you don't want to provide that functionality. But let's actually add both of those in so that you can kind of see how we have our script, but we actually make it more compatible with the Godot editor specifically. So on this first node script, if you want to make it a global class and populate the add node menu, then you would just go here above the class declaration, and you would give it the global class attribute. And then down here, we have the variable, right? But we can't edit it. You can see it's already auto-suggesting. So if you make it export, that means you can edit it inside of the Godot editor, and you can change it away from its default. The default is down here. So I'm going to hit tab and just have that autocomplete. So this tag just makes it editable inside of the Godot inspector. So if I go back to the Godot editor and click on the node, you can see that it hasn't updated. We have to compile it before we can actually, change the values, because the export tag is a new thing. I'm going to rename the node with F2 first node, just so it's consistent with the class name. And instead of compiling it here, which is totally valid, I'm going to do it in the inspector. So another way you can do that is if you go into terminal, you're in this project. First off, we have to be in the Godot folder. So if I type ls in the terminal, it lists out the files and folders so you can see Godot. I'm going to cd to change directory into it. So change directory Godot. And then inside of here, you can type in .NET build, and that's going to build the solution and all of the projects inside of it. You can see it takes 0.8 seconds, so pretty fast. And then I can Alt-Tab back to Godot, and you can see that the export is now available here. As a property, we can actually adjust. So I can change it for 50 right here, and now you can edit your statistics inside of the Godot editor. Okay, so down here after the health declaration, I'm going to put in the ready function. So ready function is built into Node, so we're actually overriding it. So it's public override void. Void is the return type, as in it returns nothing. And then we have to implement that Godot method. So we're taking ready and we're overriding it, which means we change what it originally does. And then I'll just hit tab to autocomplete, and we put in this gd.print, which is effectively is saying log to the Godot console whatever string message we put into here. So you can see first node is ready with health plus health. The plus here means that you're adding the first string with whatever comes after this. It's automatically going to convert this integer value into a string value, which I think is one distinction already from GDScript. Integers and floats automatically getting converted to a string by having this plus symbol here. So yeah, this just means that when we load the game and the node has hit the ready part of the lifecycle, it's going to print to the console, so we know it's loaded properly. Okay, so if you want, you can go back to the console, and I'm just going to up arrow to call the last command .NET build and build it here. I think that's just actually a little quicker than going back and forth with the Godot editor. But back in the Godot editor, since we changed the code but we've already applied it, you shouldn't see that warning symbol up here. We can just go ahead and hit play the project. You'll have to define the first starting scene. So we're going to want the current scene world, or you can hit select to select one. So that would look like this. Select, and then you find the .tscn file and just double click on that. The game is going to compile and load, and you'll see here the first node is ready with health 50. So that means it's actually using the export custom value we defined in the editor, not the default for the script, which is 100 actually. Okay, so I wanted to cut it here so that it is kept as concise as I can really make it. I hope everybody found this tutorial helpful. And I do want to mention that personally on my own Godot projects, I think I have made the decision to kind of commit to C#. So you'll be seeing a lot more C# content coming out on my channel going forward. So thanks everybody for watching. I've been Chris, and until my next video, I will see you guys then.